Since 19th of September, 1944, the fog over the French countryside was thick like milk, curling through the trees and hugging the roads as if nature itself was trying to muffle the sound of war. Near the small village of Écoust-Sainte-Maine, a column of German infantry moved cautiously through the broken landscape. Their boots sank into the muddy tracks left behind by retreating tanks, and their eyes darted through the ruins with that haunted, jumpy look of men who had seen too much and trusted too little. Unteroffizier Karl Bremer led the squad, his MP-40 hanging tight against his chest, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Behind him, 10 more soldiers followed, all exhausted, dirty, and hungry for sleep. They were part of the 11th Panzer Division, what was left of it anyway. The Americans had been pushing harder than ever since Normandy, and the Germans couldn't understand how they were always one step ahead. Karl glanced back at his radio operator, a young soldier named Dieter. "Keep your transmissions short," he whispered. "We can't risk them intercepting." Dieter nodded, clutching his bulky radio unit. He didn't say it, but everyone knew. Their radios were unreliable, static-filled, temperamental, and barely functional under bombardment. Still, it was all they had. Unbeknownst to them, less than 2 kilometers away, 3 M4 Sherman tanks sat camouflaged behind a thick hedgerow. Inside the lead tank, Lieutenant Jack Carter, a lanky Kansas farm boy turned tank commander, listened closely to a set of headphones connected to the tank's radio. His brow furrowed as he heard the faint crackle of intercepted German chatter. "Got movement," he murmured. "Sounds like a patrol. Talking coordinates. Moving east down the ravine road." Sergeant O'Neill, sitting beside him, gave a slow nod. "Third time this week. Same pattern." "These poor bastards don't even know we're listening," Carter muttered, flicking a switch on the SCR 508 radio. The signal was clear. American tanks were equipped with cutting-edge tech, frequency hopping, radios, secure channels, and the ability to eavesdrop on the enemy with shocking precision. The American tech wasn't just about talking tank to tank. It was about control, strategy, prediction. And right now, that meant they could hear the enemy planning an ambush before it even began. In the 2nd Sherman, Private Ray Morales adjusted the antenna slightly. "Picking up that same group again," he said. "Same squad as yesterday. They think we're blind." But they weren't blind. Not even close. Farther along the ravine, Karl raised his hand, signaling his squad to stop. He felt uneasy. The area was too quiet. No birds, no movement. He turned to Dieter again. "Check in with command. Ask for artillery support to cover our crossing." Dieter flipped open the radio and began transmitting. And that's when Carter smiled. "They're requesting cover," he said. "Artillery's not coming fast enough. We've got maybe 5 minutes." "What do you want to do?" O'Neill asked, gripping the turret controls. Carter didn't answer right away. He stared out through the scope, eyes scanning the tree line. Then he leaned into the mic. "All units, this is Iron Fox. Enemy squad moving east on Ravine Road. Confirmed patrol size 10+. Prepare to engage. No mercy." The other 2 Shermans confirmed with 2 sharp clicks over the net. The Germans still had no idea. No idea that every time they spoke, every movement they planned, every order they whispered, the Shermans heard it first. As the German squad crept forward into the narrowest part of the ravine, the trap was already closing around them, and they didn't even know they were being hunted. The first shot came like thunder out of nowhere. Karl barely had time to register the sound before the ground beneath his feet exploded. Dirt, smoke, and bits of shrapnel sprayed across the squad like a storm of nails. One of the younger soldiers, Müller, screamed and hit the ground, clutching his leg, blood pouring through his fingers. "Ambush!" someone yelled, but it was too late for warnings now. Shells roared from beyond the ridge, one after another, landing with terrifying precision. Trees snapped, flames erupted from the brush, and the ravine turned into a fire trap. Panic took hold. The soldiers scattered, diving behind whatever cover they could find. Rocks, ditches, broken tree stumps. Carl's ears rang as he crawled behind a dead log, heart pounding like a drum. His training told him this wasn't random. This was too accurate, too clean. These Americans weren't guessing their position. They knew. "Dieter!" Carl shouted over the chaos, crawling toward the radio operator who was ducked behind a boulder, trying to get the radio working again. "Call command. Tell them we're under heavy artillery fire." I'm trying," Dieter stuttered, sweat and mud streaking his face. "No signal. They're jamming us." Carl cursed under his breath. That wasn't normal either. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. It felt like the Americans were inside their heads, predicting every move before they made it. Back behind the hedgerow, Lieutenant Carter watched the distant chaos through his periscope with a cold, controlled focus. He wasn't celebrating. This wasn't joy. This was the brutal efficiency of warfare, and the advantage of knowing your enemy's every word. "Fire one more, front cannon." "Hit their fallback point," he ordered. "Let's push 'em deeper." The tank's gun recoiled again, belching fire and thunder. The shell whistled through the air and exploded right where the German squad had planned to regroup. O'Neill grinned darkly. They're not even going to get the chance to breathe. The radios crackled with updates. Other Sherman units reported German panzer divisions pulling back from nearby roads. The same secret advantage, radio surveillance, was being used across the whole sector. Inside the ravine, Carl pulled a bleeding soldier back behind cover. His squad was falling apart. Screams echoed around them. 2 men were down. The rest were shaken, silent, confused. He looked to the skies, hoping for Luftwaffe support. Nothing. Not even the hum of a fighter. Just smoke and death. "We've been compromised," he muttered. They knew. "Maybe a spy?" Dieter offered weakly. "No," Carl said slowly, grim realization dawning. "They're hearing us. Somehow. They're listening." The thought chilled him more than the cold mud soaking into his uniform. He had always believed in German superiority, in tactics, in discipline, in technology. But now, all that felt like a myth collapsing. How could the Americans, those clumsy, brash soldiers, be this precise, this fast? He didn't know the answer. Not yet. But in a Sherman tank 500 meters away, Carter did. Their radios were more than just a communication tool. They were a weapon, one the Germans never saw coming. "We'll move in 5, Carter said over the net. "Sweep the area. No survivors." In the distance, Carl looked up from the ravine, eyes narrowing at the low rumble of engines. The Shermans were coming, and this time they weren't waiting to be found. The rumble grew louder, like the growl of something ancient and angry rising from the earth itself. Carl wiped a smear of blood from his forehead, heart thudding against his ribs. He could hear the engines now, close, heavy, crawling like predators across the landscape. He peeked above the burned log and saw the glint of steel between the trees. Shermans, 3 of them, spread out, methodical. Not rushing in like fools. No, they were precise, slow, confident. They knew there wasn't much resistance left. They were sweeping up. "Fall back to the east," Carl yelled to the remaining men. "Toward the tree line. We can't fight them out here." One of the soldiers, Schiller, hesitated. "We don't have anti-tank." "What's the plan? Run!" Carl didn't answer. He had no plan. He had no time. All he had was instinct, and instinct screamed to move. Dieter tossed the radio down, useless now, and followed. The squad, what was left of it, scrambled through the mud, dodging craters and dragging the wounded. Every sound was louder than it should have been. The churn of tank treads, the clank of armor, the whine of hydraulics rotating turrets. And then came the voice. Calm. American. Drop your weapons and surrender. You are surrounded. The voice echoed through the fog, distorted slightly through loudspeakers mounted on the Sherman's hull. It was almost surreal. For a second, even Carl froze. He wasn't used to the enemy talking to him. War, until now, had always been guns and explosions, not words broadcast like the voice of God. But it wasn't God. It was Lieutenant Jack Carter, and he had already made up his mind. No answer, he said quietly inside the tank. Keep the formation tight. If they move, hit 'em hard. O'Neill shifted in his seat. Think they'll run? Carter shook his head. They're trained to fight. But they're cracked. You can see it in their moves. Desperate. Through the periscope, he saw 3 Germans break into a sprint toward the eastern ridge. Not toward cover, just away. Permission to fire? The gunner asked. Carter hesitated. War was war, but watching men run without weapons, it never sat right. Then he remembered what they'd heard on the intercepted channels last night, how the German officers had ordered a local farmhouse torched for harboring Americans. A woman and 2 children were killed. Carter's jaw clenched. Fire. The shell tore through the morning air and turned the fleeing soldiers into nothing but red mist and black smoke. Back in the ravine, Carl dropped behind a tree, breathing hard. He had seen it. The explosion. His men, just gone. No warning, no mercy. Just fire and silence. They're tracking us like animals, he whispered. Every move. Dieter was pale, shaking. How? We're using coded channels. How the hell do they know? Carl thought of their conversations. Every reposition, every call for help, every desperate request. All of it had been spoken over the radio. All of it had been heard. It's the radios, Carl muttered. They're tanks. They're not just machines. They're listening posts. That thought terrified him more than the guns. Meanwhile, Carter stepped out of the Sherman for a moment, boots hitting the cold earth. Smoke still curled from the tree line ahead. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. O'Neill stayed inside, watching him. You good? He asked over the intercom. Carter took a long drag and exhaled. They still don't know, he said. They don't understand. That every time they whisper into their radios, it's like handing us a map. Behind him, the tanks rolled forward again, silent, but deadly. And somewhere in that scorched stretch of forest, Carl made a choice. He was going to survive. But first, he was going to find out exactly how the Americans were hearing them. And when he did, he swore. Someone was going to pay. The forest felt like it was closing in around them. Burned trees, torn roots, shattered trunks. The air stank of diesel, blood, and the sharp metallic tang of fear. Carl moved low and fast through the brush, Dieter panting behind him, his face smeared with sweat and ash. Only 4 of them remained now, maybe 5 if Miller was still breathing wherever he had collapsed. No gunfire now, just the soft thud of boots, the distant hum of tank engines crawling forward like a heartbeat of metal. They're not chasing us, Dieter whispered. Why aren't they finishing it? Carl stopped, pressing himself against a thick tree. He looked back. The tanks were still visible between the trees, moving slow and steady, but not firing. No shots, no shouting, just the terrifying, quiet certainty of a predator that already knows its prey is dying. They don't have to, Carl said, voice tight. We're already dead. They're just making sure we feel it first. But something else gnawed at him now. An idea. A theory. The ambush hadn't been a lucky guess. The Americans had known their exact movement, route, fallback point, and even their timing. Carl closed his eyes, thinking back to the last few weeks. Every patrol that was intercepted, every surprise engagement, every failed reposition. They'd been heard. Not once, not twice, every time. "Dieter," Carl said suddenly, "give me your radio pack." "What?" "It's dead. No signal, no frequency. It's junk." "I don't want to use it," Carl snapped. "I want to see how they're using theirs." Dieter hesitated, then slipped off the heavy set and handed it over. Carl slung it onto his back and adjusted the headphones. He turned the knobs slowly, dialing through the static. Then he heard it. Not German, not their channels, but a faint, steady stream of English voices, clear, sharp, confident. "Unit 3, sweep east, hold formation. German squad headed toward ridge." Carl's blood turned cold. The realization hit him like a rifle butt to the chest. "They're broadcasting their own movement?" Dieter asked in disbelief, listening in. "No," Carl said, shaking his head slowly. "They're not broadcasting. These are orders, live orders between tanks. Clean signal. Clear. And they're listening to us, too. That's how they knew. Every word we say on this thing. They hear," Dieter finished, stunned. Carl's mouth went dry. "Their radios are beyond anything we've got. They're not fighting us with bullets. They're fighting us with information." Suddenly he understood. The tanks weren't just tanks. They were ears, interceptors, mobile command nodes, and Germany's outdated, bulky comms were as good as shouting in the dark. "We're ghosts," Carl said bitterly. "Dead men talking, and the Americans? They were gods with ears in the trees." Just then, another voice crackled through the headset. "Carter's, target group has scattered. Minimal resistance. Small detachment moving east. Let 'em run." "Let 'em wonder?" Carl flinched. The voice sounded too close. "Too calm, Dieter," he said, swallowing hard. "They know we're still alive. Then we run." Carl shook his head. "No, not this time. We go dark. No radios. No signals. We move like shadows. But where?" Carl stared toward the distant hills. "To their lines. To their tanks. I want to see the inside of one of those machines. I want to know how they listen." Dieter stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want to sneak into the Americans' camp?" Carl nodded grimly. "Not to fight," he said. "To learn. Because the moment Berlin finds out what these tanks can really do, this war changes. And for the first time since the ambush began, Carl wasn't running anymore. He was hunting." They moved like ghosts now, silent, radio dead, ducking under branches and hugging every ridge and shadow the scorched earth could offer. The sun was low, bleeding orange across the horizon, painting the ruins in a light too beautiful for a battlefield. Carl and Dieter crept past the corpses of their own fallen squad, careful not to draw attention. The Sherman tanks were advancing slowly behind them, methodical, hunting, but not chasing. Not yet. That's what made them terrifying. "They're not worried," Dieter whispered, crouched beside a rusted German half-track blown to pieces 2 days ago. "They think we're already dead." "They don't need to worry," Carl muttered. "That's the power they have now. They know before we do." He paused and stared through a broken pair of field binoculars he found on a corpse. In the distance, he spotted the American Forward Operations Post tucked behind the tree line, a mobile camp near the ridge. Camo nets stretched over radio trucks, fuel drums stacked near supply crates, and Shermans idling beside canvas tents. No walls, no watchtowers, just soldiers walking freely, talking over headsets, radios buzzing on every frequency. "See that?" Carl said. "They're casual, not even guarding it properly." Dieter swallowed. "Because they know we're deaf, dumb, and blind?" Carl nodded slowly. "Which is why they'll never expect us to walk right into their house." That night, they waited. The sky blackened, the moon ducked behind clouds, and the forest sank into a thick silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of insects and distant tank engines settling into sleep mode. Then, like shadows on a black canvas, the two Germans crawled toward the American position. They didn't go through the front. That would have been suicide. They moved through a narrow ditch behind the camp, past a broken fence line where the Americans had carelessly dumped scrap metal. There, half covered in foliage, was a forgotten Sherman. Damaged, its treads busted, hull scorched from a mine blast, and abandoned outside the main perimeter. Carl approached it like a hunter approaching a wounded animal. He pressed his hand to the side of the tank. Warm, not cold. Someone had been inside it recently. "Help me up," he whispered. Dieter knelt, and Carl climbed onto the hull, carefully pushing open the top hatch. It creaked but didn't scream. He dropped in. The inside smelled of oil, smoke, and sweat. But what caught his eye immediately was the radio panel. Intact, still humming. Unlike their own clunky boxes back home, this was something else entirely. Sleek, compact, dozens of channels, encryption dials, frequency-hopping toggles, and a strange switch labeled Voice Relay Lock. He touched it, stunned. This wasn't just a radio. It was a command tool. Dieter slipped in behind him, eyes wide. "My God," he breathed. "This isn't a radio. It's a network." Carl ran his fingers across the controls, flipping the switch slowly. A voice filled the cabin, crisp and clear. "Unit Bravo. Confirm enemy remnants moving northeast. Possible survivors from earlier engagement." Another voice responded, calm. "Copy that. We'll sweep." "They won't get far," Dieter paled. "That's us. They're still tracking us." "No," Carl said, eyes locked on the relay. "They were always tracking us. We just never knew." He looked around. Scattered on the floor were American notepads, maps, and a printed chart of intercepted German frequencies. Highlighted. Marked. Studied. They had turned German comms into an open book. Carl grabbed a handful of documents, shoving them into his coat. "We're taking this back to command. They have to see this." But before he could climb out, they both froze. Footsteps outside. Boots on metal. Two voices. American. "Thought this tank was empty?" "Maybe, but orders are orders. They want it checked before they tow it out tomorrow." Carl's eyes went wide. "Down," he hissed, pulling Dieter with him into the crew compartment. The hatch creaked open above. A flashlight beam cut through the tank. "Clear?" one voice asked. The other paused. "Wait!" Silence. Carl held his breath. His pistol was in his hand now. His heartbeat slammed in his ears. The American stepped further in. That's when Carl made the choice. Not to shoot, but to listen and to wait. The flashlight beam swept slowly across the cramped interior, landing briefly on Carl's boot before gliding past. He didn't move, not even a twitch. His body was pressed so far into the shadows he could feel the steel of the tank digging into his ribs. Dieter was curled behind him, barely breathing, his trembling fingers clutching a combat knife he didn't even know how to use. The American soldier stepped further in. Boots scraped against metal. The faint creak of a headset wire dragging. The sound of chewing gum. "Looks clear," the first voice muttered. "Nothing but old maps and smoke. No bodies?" "Nope." The flashlight flicked off. Carl exhaled the smallest breath, just enough to keep his lungs working. Another second, another wrong twitch, and they'd be discovered. Then, a loud bang from outside the tank. A metallic clang and someone yelling, "Private! Get your ass out here! We're moving out at dawn! Tank's getting towed!" The soldier above paused, clearly annoyed. Fucking babysitting junk! He turned around and climbed out, the hatch slamming shut behind him. Silence returned. For a moment, neither Carl nor Dieter moved. Then, slowly, Carl pushed himself up from the shadows, sweat dripping from his jaw. "We can't stay," Dieter whispered hoarsely. "They're towing this thing in the morning." Carl nodded. "Then we leave now, with the intel." He snatched up the radio schematics, maps, and frequency logs, stuffing them into his satchel. But as he turned to climb out, something stopped him. A notebook wedged behind the seat. Thin, handwritten, curious. Carl pulled it out. The name on the front, Latte J. Carter inside, were pages of notes, field entries, and personal logs. But one page was marked in red. Intercept pattern. Echo pulse. Confirmed that German squads communicate in short-form phrases. Standard tactic: wait 30 seconds post-transmission. Calculate average relocation distance. Radios triangulate heat signatures via field scanners. Sherman units respond based on anticipated movements, not observed. Result: psychological warfare. Make the enemy believe you're omniscient. Let fear do half the killing. Carl stared at the words. They weren't just listening, they were predicting, manipulating, creating the illusion that they were. Everywhere and nowhere at once. This is beyond technology, he murmured. It's a doctrine. They're using fear as a weapon, Dieter said, stunned. Our own radios are betraying us. Carl shoved the notebook into his bag. We have to get this across the line. If High Command doesn't know what we're up against, this war's already lost. They waited until the patrol thinned out, then slipped from the Sherman like shadows reborn. Past the perimeter, through the ruined orchard, across a frozen creek that cracked with every step. For hours they crawled, crept, and held their breath whenever an engine purred nearby, or a flare lit the night. By dawn, they were miles from the American post, their uniforms soaked and torn, hands raw from cold and crawling. But they were alive, and they were carrying something more dangerous than any rifle. Proof. 2 days later, in a damp bunker outside Lille, Carl stood before 3 intelligence officers in crisp gray coats, the table before them covered in the materials he'd brought back. Radio logs, decoded frequencies, Carter's notebook. The lead officer, Oberst Hoffman, narrowed his eyes as he flipped through the pages. "This is how they ambushed your squad?" he asked without looking up. Carl nodded. "They knew everything, before we even moved. Our radios are open doors." Hoffman tapped a finger on Carter's notes. "And this, Lieutenant." They arrived in Berlin under heavy fog. Gray skies bleeding into grayer buildings, a city still wearing the scars of air raids and collapsing confidence. Carl stepped out of the military transport truck and looked around. Even the capital felt hollow now. Civilians moved like sleepwalkers. Soldiers barely saluted. Posters of Hitler still fluttered from poles, but the fire behind the eyes of the people had dimmed. Inside the Reich Intelligence Directorate, things moved faster. The war wasn't over in here. It was desperate. Men in long coats barked into phones. Maps covered entire walls, red lines bleeding backward toward the German heartland. 13 and Dieter were escorted down into a secure bunker, beneath the city. 3 flights of stairs and a steel door, guarded by SS. A bald man with an iron cross pinned to his chest waited inside. His name, Major Reinhard Kruger, Chief of Signals Intelligence. He didn't shake hands. "You brought something worth our time." "Unteroffizier Bremer," Kruger said coldly, flipping through the captured American notes. "For your sake, it better be as dangerous as you claim." Carl stood stiffly. "It's more than dangerous. It's how they're winning." Kruger gestured to the chalkboard behind him. A schematic of American radio patterns was already drawn, based on Carl's intel, but it only scratched the surface. "Show him the Carter notebook," Carl told Dieter. Dieter pulled the worn book from his coat and handed it over. Kruger opened it, scanning quickly. As he read, his expression shifted. from skepticism to alarm. "You're telling me these Shermans can triangulate squad positions based solely on our radio bursts?" he asked sharply. "Yes," Carl replied. "They listen, map the timing, and predict our paths. They don't just track, they anticipate. It's not reaction. It's preemption." Kruger slammed the notebook shut and turned to one of his aides. "Wake the engineers. Get me General Hausfeld on the encrypted line. I want prototypes for directional jammers by the end of the week." Then he turned back to Carl. "Your intel just bought Germany a sliver of hope," he said. "Congratulations. You're no longer a grunt," Carl blinked. "What?" "You're being reassigned," Kruger said. "Effective immediately. You'll report to Division Echo, Counterintelligence Field Unit. You'll hunt their advantage. From the inside," Dieter frowned. "From the inside of what?" Kruger smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Sherman tanks." Carl's blood chilled. "You want me to go back? Behind lines?" "Not just back," Kruger said. "You're going to be captured." The plan was insane, reckless, but it worked. 5 days later, dressed in a blood-streaked American uniform stolen from a dead officer, Carl knelt in a shallow ditch near the Belgian border, hand pressed to a wound carefully inflicted by German medics. A small squad of American infantry was approaching, a Sherman tank among them. They spotted him. "Guns raised!" Voices shouted in English. Carl collapsed, pretending to black out. When he opened his eyes again, he was inside the belly of a Sherman, alive and captured, just as planned. "You're lucky we found you before the Krauts did," a gruff voice said. Carl blinked, feigning confusion. An American medic leaned over him. "Name?" the soldier asked. "James Kessler," Carl replied, in flawless, American-accented English. "First Armored. Got separated. Radio was hit. Where were you stationed?" "North of Bastogne. They flanked us. Hit our right side hard. Lost the tank. Crawled out. Blacked out near the ridge." The medic nodded slowly, skeptical but convinced enough. "You're in with Lieutenant Carter's unit now." "He's up front." Carl stiffened. "Just a little." Carter, the same name in the notebook. The man who wrote the doctrine that destroyed his squad. The man who turned radios into weapons. And now, Carl was inside his machine. He was going to study it. He was going to expose it. And if the opportunity came, he was going to kill him. The Sherman tank growled through the thick Belgian mud, treads grinding over the earth like a slow, unstoppable beast. Inside, Carl, now James Kessler, sat crammed between a grinning machine gunner and a young radio operator barely old enough to shave. Every bolt, every panel, every cable running through the tank was a glimpse into the enemy's most precious secret. But it was the voice in front of him that truly held his attention. "Keep an ear on Channel 4. I want updates on any Kraut chatter west of the ridge," said Lieutenant Jack Carter, without turning. "Calm, precise, just like in the notebook." His hands danced over the radio controls like a pianist. "They're using that same short pulse code. We'll get a fix in under 10 minutes. Carl pretended to cough, hiding the tightening of his jaw. He wanted nothing more than to shove a bayonet into Carter's spine right then and there. But revenge could wait. This was his mission now. "Sir," the young radio op said, "I'm picking up a faint broadcast. German, northeast grid. Confirming echo pulse match." Carter nodded, like it was routine. "Triangulate. Assume a 60-second delay on movement. Adjust for terrain." Carl's mind spun. "They're not just listening. They're mapping us like chess pieces." And it worked. 20 minutes later, the tank rolled up to a shattered ridge where a squad of German soldiers lay scattered across the rocks, blown apart by artillery zeroed in long before they ever arrived. One tried to crawl. A second shell erased him from the world. Carter didn't even blink. Carl stared, horrified, not at the death, but at how easy it was for the Americans. This wasn't war, it was surgical extermination. That night, camped beneath a broken church steeple, Carl sat near the tank, sharpening a knife he had no intention of using. Yet, Carter stood beside the Sherman, staring out into the darkness with a cigarette hanging from his lips. "You did good work today," Carter said, not looking at him. "Heard you used to run comms. That true?" Carl nodded, playing dumb. "Yeah, back in the old unit. Tank got hit. I got out." Carter turned, finally facing him, eyes sharp, reading him like a book. "You're not dumb, Kessler. You know what this is, right?" "What?" "This war," Carter said, tapping the side of the tank, "isn't about tanks anymore. Not guns, not bombs. It's about what you hear before you see. That's how you win." Carl didn't respond. He was watching Carter's hands. One of them rested casually on the Sherman's radio box, the same model Carl had studied. The switch labeled Voice Relay Lock glowed faintly. "Most of the guys think the radios are just radios," Carter went on. "But we've turned them into predictive tools. We feed patterns into the net. The tanks aren't just listening, they're learning." "Learning?" Carl asked, heart pounding. "Every German unit that broadcasts? We catalog their speech rhythm, response time, transmission habits. Eventually," Carter smiled darkly, "we know how they think. And once you know how your enemy thinks, you control the war," Carl finished, barely hiding the venom in his voice. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Exactly." Later that night, while the others slept and the radios hummed quietly, Carl slipped into the tank's comms bay. He worked fast, hands steady. He wasn't just stealing intel this time, he was planting something, a hidden code, a frequency spike, a backdoor signal that only the Germans could recognize, a way to expose this network Carter had built. As he finished, a shadow fell across the hatch. Carter stood there, expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Carl froze. "Just wanted to get familiar with the setup. Muscle memory." Carter stepped closer, one boot tapping the steel floor. "You ever wonder why we're always one step ahead, Kessler?" Carl's hand slipped toward his concealed knife, just an inch. "Why?" he asked. Carter leaned in close, voice a whisper. "Because someone inside is always watching the other side." Carl's blood ran cold. Did he know? Then Carter smiled, clapped him on the shoulder, and turned away. "We move at dawn. Try not to look so jumpy." "Soldier." Carl stared after him, breathing hard, heart thundering. He wasn't sure if Carter had figured him out, or if he was just toying with him. But one thing was clear. The hunter had stepped into the wolf's den, and the wolf might already know.